It's Sports Bazaar.
Welcome aboard, everyone.
If anyone isn't happy, we call it all off immediately.
The hunt for the weirdest.
There you go. Can you put out a fact sheet with this? Blown my mind. I can't keep up.
Strangest.
Catastrophic, amazing, bizarre. Multiple layers of stupidity coming together.
What could go wrong?
Most unbelievable.
It's like a Coen Brothers movie.
Stories to ever occur.
They're only going to get weirder from here.
Get comfy, everyone.
Some good, some bad, and some just bizarre, which we love.
In the world of sport.
How many chimneys could you do in a day?
I've researched the Tour de France, not chimneys.
Sports Bazaar.
Right, police are called in.
For the players.
Dennis Rodman is telling you to calm down. Testicle soup.
Can I just stop you for a second?
Don't act like you've never done this. I feel like once again we've strayed away from what I've researched.
It's time for the leaders of the hunt.
An old couple who've got our spark back.
It's Titus O'Reilly and Mick Molloy.
Welcome back to Sports Bazaar, the latest edition of. I'm Mick Molloy, and of course, as always, doing the heavy lifting, Titus O'Reilly. Titus, where are we going? Fill me in. I have no idea. This is always my favourite moment of the week. What sport? Where? When? Fill me in.
Well, this one we are going way back. So I think lately we've done a bit of FIFA corruption,
Sure.
bit of John Daly,
Wow.
modern era sort of stuff,
Yeah.
and we're going back in time a fair bit here, and we're going to do the early days of boxing.
Okay. Oh,
So,
brilliant.
So we did one. If you haven't listened to it yet, Young Griffo,
You must go.
a boxer who went in the late sort of 19th century.
Extraordinary
Early
story.
20th, went off to America
Australian.
from Australia.
Yeah.
One of the great sports stories
It
wherever
should be
you're from.
a movie
Yeah.
made
You don't have to
by
like boxing,
Australians.
just-
It's an epic
So
tale
haven't we-
from start to finish. So when we're talking boxing, are we talking Queensberry rules? Or are we...
We're going to take you from basically what modern day boxing, the marquee of Queensberry rules.
Yes.
We're going to go up to there, but we're going to go how we got to that point where you have basically the rules.
the
of
rules are
modern
put in
boxing.
place, which still exist today.
Yeah, so I mean, two guys fighting, and you and I know this all too
Sure.
well, is not an uncommon thing. So to call it a sport is, cavemen probably boxed on, So
Sure.
it's the simplest. It's the simplest sport in many ways. Boxing, in that it's two guys with two fists each, and they just pummel each
going
other.
hammer and
right?
tongs.
They go hammer and tongs. So there's evidence So why we think it was probably around, and this is just to give you the narrowing down the time frame we're looking at. So you have it probably around from the dawn of time.
Yeah.
Then we've got some evidence of in Egypt and Mesopotamia. So this is in 3,000 years before Christ. We've got images on walls of boxing.
Of boxing?
Not boxing as we know it today, but blokes squaring up to each other, So we've got that sort of stuff.
But hieroglyphics, everything looks kind of boxing.
It does
isn't
quite,
kinda.
Are they boxing or harvesting wheat? Or dancing? I can't
There
tell.
you go. Yeah.
So you have got that, and then you've got, it then gets in, we know it got included into the ancient Olympics, where the Greeks
Yep.
had a form of boxing, and a lot of those sort of things. So there's that era. Then the ancient Romans had it as well. So the Romans had it. They often would have it part of gladiatorial contests. Theirs
Yeah.
was a bit different. They would wrap their hands and forearms with leather straps, and it would be studded with metal shards.
Okay.
And so instead of like boxing gloves, but with metal shards sticking out of
How
it.
many
and
rounds did they go?
They battled to the death.
Oh, to death, was it?
Because it was Rome.
Call
Rome
me
was
old-fashioned, but those were the days. When
No
it ended
nanny
in-
state.
This nanny state. I remember when they dropped it from 15 to 12 rounds. Yeah. I thought that was too much. Whatever happened to the death?
To the death, bring it back.
Do you reckon in those days when they stopped doing it to the death, there would have been people going, this is bullshit.
I'm absolutely positive people were writing letters to the editor, or sending tablets in, putting them up.
That's me done. That's the last boxing match I attend.
I think of this cancel culture. Any change is met by it, right? It always happens, and it's
No need for the ringside doctor. It's a coroner. The
This is a
ringside
jobs
coroner.
program for doctors. It's ridiculous. So this all is big, but then of course, with the fall of the Roman Empire, and the rise of sort of and we're talking obviously in China and South America, this is happening too. But we're getting to how the modern day boxing emerges. Which
Remember
very
the
much-
Romans? Did they take their eye off the ball?
Well, it
Is
depends.
there a reason?
I just think they got lazy. They got,
Too many orgies. Too much lying around in togas, on chaise lounges. Too much grape eating.
They did. It was like, it's the typical thing, right? You live in cities and you get rich, so you become soft.
Yeah.
And then people who live in like the forest or on the steppe and have nothing go,
right then,
we'll take this. So the Roman Empire collapses, and what happens here in medieval Europe, so we're tracing the line to the current rules of boxing.
Yes.
So it goes through Europe. You then have boxing goes away because basically the aristocratic class in medieval England are into jousting, archery, fencing, all these sort of things, because they're about warfare. It's, there's a complete lack of interest because you're just training the whole time to kill people in war. So the idea of doing it for sport becomes a bit...
We don't need.
They do tournaments and stuff, but that's, it's jousting. I mean, I think commoners kept punching on. One of the great...
Good on them.
Good on them.
Kept the spirit alive.
So this brings us up. So this is boxing in any sort of organised form has sort of really disappeared. So this brings us up to where we're going to start really our story is the Georgian era. So you're sort of talking... This sort of goes from 1714... through to 1837, so right up to the Victorian era, so
all right,
Queen
here
Victoria.
We go.
So, this is 1714 to sort of 1837 until Queen Victoria ascends. And it's an interesting time because it's where the last of sort of the medieval era meets the beginning of the modern era in England.
Right.
So, England's in the ascendancy. It's starting to set up its empire in massive ways. It's suddenly no longer... They're moving on from knights to, having firearms and all this.
They put the armour away.
They've put the armour away and all this. So medieval England's going away in many ways. And where it's changing is like King George II, he's the last monarch ever born outside of Britain.
Yeah,
so they rule that. These are the Hanoverian kings who rule Germany and England. He's the last king born outside of Britain. After this, it becomes all English, born in English, speak
Was
English.
medieval the most brutal era? Like, if you think about it, would that have been like
I think it's right up there.
It's got to be up there.
Also, all the pestilence. It's like we've lived through one, but it's nothing compared to...
But going medieval is a euphemism for going cocoa
absolute
bananas.
brutality.
Total brutality.
Yeah.
And their kind of instruments of warfare... It's like someone's sitting around spending a lot of time thinking about, I don't know, a ball on a chain with spikes or a sword the size of a small car.
Oh, and they'd torture people and kill people publicly, like as an exhibition. Yeah. And the kids, they'd take all... It was like a family day out to watch someone being, like, executed in the most horrific...
Like large popcorn, large Coke. Come on, kids, let's go down.
It's a double billing. Let's go. I don't want to go to the execution. I'm bored.
Torturer was a legitimate profession.
It's legit. The amount of, and this is where like they would get like bears to fight dogs, and they would get chickens, roosters to fight dogs.
They got too much spare time on their hands, or they're really trying.
Anything that could fight something was like, let's give it a whirl.
What was the instrument, the weapon? What was the torture instrument? The rack.
The rack.
I remember the rack.
They had the rack. They had.
What about the one with the spikes in it? They'd close the.
Oh yeah, like the chamber where they would what's it called? Yeah, Iron Maiden, wasn't it?
The Iron Maiden. Yeah. And let's not forget the old red hot poker up the arse. That had its moments.
On the podcast, people won't just see me nervously shift in my seat thinking about that one. Not what you want. So this is the era it's coming out of. And it hasn't, and so we're in this weird bit where the Victorian era under Queen Victoria is when Britain becomes very buttoned up and stuffy.
Okay.
And they start to ban a lot of this stuff. But the Georgian era is sort of where you got the remnants of that. It hasn't quite happened yet. So boxing is really influenced by this. So in fact, this is like George II, the last king born out of thing. He doesn't speak English, he speaks German. And
what's he the king of?
He's the king of England and
he doesn't speak English.
Hanover, which is in Germany. So he's got multiple, like this is when, multiple people, they rule multiple places.
Wow.
And he was known as being popular with the people because he wasn't his father, who they hated because they saw him as too German. So the English and the Germans even then.
Imagine what he was doing.
But for instance, this is how medieval this sort of time is. He's the last ever British royal, this is George II, to command an army in the field. Like he's actually in the army commanding it. Yeah.
Those were the days.
It was the War of Austrian Succession, and the commoners in Britain put bets on whether or not he'd be killed. So it was a fun time, you know. This was sort of but it's also people are moving into cities. It's becoming more modern. You're in the big.
Okay.
So this is also the time of the Age of Enlightenment. So this is when the Europeans are going back and finding the records of the Romans and the Greeks. It's getting like a lot of these sources are being translated back into Latin after being in Persia and places like that, and they're starting to learn this. And the Romans and the Greeks talk a lot about boxing. Okay. So that British aristocracy start to go, oh, well, this boxing, let's try and emulate the Romans.
What's this caper all about?
And get into boxing again. So they suddenly started. So they're starting to put down the swords a little bit and pick up their fists, right? So this is all happening, and so it's a big revival. And you suddenly have the aristocracy putting huge amounts of money on boxers and who are working class people, but they back them.
These are like mentors again, is it? Like,
and this leads right up to the Regency period, which is sort of 1811, 1812, it hits its peak. And the new show, like Bridgerton, which is on Netflix, which is about this era.
I haven't watched a scene.
I can imagine you've watched all of it.
Oh, yeah.
It actually
I'm a Downton Abbey guy.
Yeah, you're more... So this
Upstairs,
show,
downstairs. Do you remember that?
I remember Upstairs,
that was the original
Downstairs.
one.
That was absolutely original.
Very good.
So this show, which is on Netflix, it shows a boxing story in it about how the aristocracy and the poor working class boxers like fund each other and all this, right? Yeah. So this is the area we're talking about, and so this is all happening, but it's getting bigger and bigger. People are really starting to get interested in this, and a lot of the practices and words that we now use with boxing, but even just phrases in life, come from this era. So assigning a colour to each corner, you have out of the red corner or the blue corner. Yes. This came from this time where a fighter would tie a scarf or a flag to their corner, and then when you lost, your opponent would come and take your flag, take your colours.
Which is a belt now.
Yeah, other phrases like to throw your hat in the ring, that comes from this era, because when fighters arrived, they would throw their hat in the ring to signal, I've arrived for a bout, I'm ready, I'll fight.
But so it would be predetermined. I can't just turn up and go,
sometimes it would be predetermined, because some of these guys would just fight. They'd go to a fair and go, I'll fight anyone who wants to fight me. And so you throw your hat in the ring to say, oh, okay, I'll do it. So it was literally like...
I'm going to do that next time I go to a sanctioned fight.
Yeah, you're in Vegas and you just go...
Yeah.
So that comes from that. Championship belts, as you mentioned, they come back from this time. In 1811, a guy called Tom Cribb, who was a huge championship boxer at the time, King George III gave him the first ever championship belt.
And what was it?
Constructed of lionskin and sterling silver.
That would be fantastic.
That was the first ever belt. It was made out of lionskin.
Wow.
So that, that would have looked nice.
It's an incredible part of boxing that you don't understand. You're playing for this ridiculous oversized belt.
That's where it comes from. And then, of course, when you start with, and this is going to be the first ever boxing belt was lionskin and sterling silver.
Yes.
So they have to get sillier from there on. Like, they start at such a ridiculously... It's not like it started off as a tiny leather belt.
No.
The first one's lionskin. If you go hard early, you've got to keep it. So pretty much,
It's got to be a dolphin belt or something after that. What are you going to...
Endangered animals. A draw. So when a draw in sport happens, this comes from this era. So a draw was when the two boxers, no one was declared the winner. They would take up the wooden stakes that marked out the boxing ring. They would draw them out of the ground.
So it's a draw.
To say,
this is fantastic.
This is done. So this is a really important time. So this is, around this time, you also have, this is all bare-knuckled boxing. So this is, we'll get into what was allowed and what was not allowed this time. But you got to remember, these guys aren't fighting with gloves. And this is where nicknames in boxing, so you got Iron Mike Tyson, you've got all these great,
Mad Dog.
Yeah, all these ones. So these are some of the nicknames which came in these early years. So you had a lot were after... First, they focused on things that were...
What year are we? I'm sorry, can you tell me?
So this is sort of, think 1700 into 1800.
Gotcha.
So this is the 19th century fairly early on, and even the end of the 17th century. You've got guys like William Stevens, who's the nailer, because he was a carpenter. You got George Milsom, who was the baker.
Because he was a baker?
Because he was a baker. So early on they go very...
They're not having a... They're not staying up late having writing sessions about the...
Then they go, well, So there's another guy, Thomas Owen, who's the fighting oil man. so yeah, not a lot of. Then they go.
The Undertaker was actually an Undertaker.
Yeah, it was literally like that, right? Then they went, well, let's do some nicknames based on race, because racism was not really a thing at the time. I mean, it was a thing and it existed, but no one cared. No. So there was Peter Cochrane, who was the Irish champion. Daniel Mendoza was known as the Jewish champion.
Yeah.
So they didn't really. So once again, not really a thing. There was a guy called Henry Pierce. So his nickname was Hen. So his nickname was the Game Chicken.
That's not intimidating. Oh, look out, everyone. The Game Chicken's throwing his hat in the ring.
Imagine him fighting Mike Tyson. It's Iron Mike Tyson versus the Game Chicken. Another guy, Tom Spring, was known for not being a heavy hitter. And so he was known as the Light Tapper, but he used the name. Like it wasn't like it was a diss. It was
He's
like
got to come in and the hugger.
Yeah. Just the fondler,
the slapper, the tickler,
the gentle caresser. Yeah, it's just,
the handsy.
Then we get some other ones that are based on some.
No one's worked out the intimidatory nature.
You're not really
of
getting one. Like there's another guy where you've had the based on their jobs off nickname, like bad nicknames.
Races.
You've races. Then you've got James Burke was known as the Deafin because he was deaf. So once again, just statements of fact more than the deafen.
How would he hear the bell?
Yeah, that's right.
Would he know when to stop?
There was another one called Tom Paddock. He was the Reddick needle pointer. So he did
I'll take him on.
Yeah, so
I'll take the needle pointer.
But that one, like they've put where he's from and what he is. Then you get Tom King was the fighting sailor, so starting to try and be a little bit more,
Okay, I'm slightly intimidated by the fighting sailor.
But still very sort of vocation-based nickname. Then you've got one guy, I don't get this one at all. His name was Sam Hurst. He was the Stalybridge infant.
I'll fight him too. I'll fight the needlework and the infant.
Now, my favourite, and once again, not really getting to, just more weird.
Yes.
There was a guy called Peter Crawley. His ring nickname was Young Rump Steak.
Because he got so tenderised. Boogada.
That's not a nickname you want in prison, I think. Like it's not a great one.
Oh my God.
So boxing's emerging in this era, and so this is sort of the 18th and 19th century. Boxing becomes important because it's seen as embodying what it is to be a British man. So there's a lot of talk in the contemporary sources that I've read about manhood.
Sure.
Right.
But you're saying it's being dominated by the aristocratic classes at this stage. Who's the audience?
Everyone. Both. Aristocrats, we get into all this, but the aristocrats fund it.
Yes.
They're like the patrons and they put
They put on the show.
They put on the show a lot of betting. A lot of betting.
I can't wait for the first match fixing, but we'll get there.
They don't fight.
They don't fight.
Much. They pay brutes of working class men, as they would see it, to do the fighting.
And
but they often reward them significantly.
But the fans are working class?
Both. Mixed. Women, men, and we'll get into some of the women and things like that too. Yeah. It's a very male-dominated sport at this point, obviously, but there are women fighting too, and there's definitely women in the audience.
I'm staggered by that.
Yeah, aristocrats are there, the working class. It's one of the few places.
A lot of pantaloons? Is this the era of the pantaloon?
Enormous amounts of pantaloons. And it's also the time where, this is where, you get, as you do with boxing now,
yes,
where you'll get rich and the poor rubbing shoulders. It's a melting pot. It's a bit like horse racing too. Like you'll get all types.
It's one of those occasions where everyone happily cohabitates under the same roof.
You all come, right?
I love those occasions.
Yeah, the Britons at the time, it's incredibly seen as an incredibly manly thing and what would now be like sort of very old school masculinity, but it was seen as to be a man, you needed to be able to fight.
Sure.
You needed to be tough, all these sort of things. This is a time of war too, so combat's a real thing. A lot of these guys might end up going and fighting, even the aristocrats. Yeah. So there's the Napoleonic Wars are coming towards the end of this. You've got all these sort of things, right? And so it was seen as good for young men to have educations in learning how to box. So it was seen as a good thing. And it was also seen that alongside it went drinking and gambling. And these were also weirdly kind
Never
of...
far away.
Never far away. And in the Georgian era, unlike the Victorian era, drinking and gambling and going to prostitutes and fighting were all seen as things that just men did. It was seen as a good thing that men did it because they
It was a simpler time.
They saw the continent, the more cultured French especially, as sort of feminine and weak, and this was what they thought, right? They saw themselves as when they and into art and
Idiots.
dressing up and or idiot like
candelabras,
soft and effeminate, and they saw the British man as hard drinking, hard gambling, hard fighting, out with the boys, was very much a kind of
see you down the whorehouse.
Yeah, exactly. It was they all did it, and it was a big thing. So they're really into this, and they saw it as not only being a man, but they saw it as being British and not like people from the continent. So boxing fits right into this.
Boxing's a statement.
Yeah, they say one guy wrote in the paper in the middle of this that the English character is preserved by boxing from preventing the thoroughly bred bulldog from turning into a whining pup.
Wow.
So it's that big,
Right.
The first recorded fight in Britain, this is when we're starting to get into like proper, it's called boxing and it's organised fighting, is in 1681 when the Protestant Mercury states, yesterday a match of boxing was performed before His Grace the Duke of Albemarle between the Duke's footman and a butcher. This is the newspaper report. Right, so it says first, it was just...
They were told on the day, you're fighting the footman.
Yeah, I want you to fight that guy.
Do
So the footman's like a servant who's sort of the errand guy and all that sort of stuff. He fights the butcher and says the latter won the prize.
Has he thrown his butcher's hat into the ring?
It says the latter won the prize, this is the butcher, as he hath done many before, being accounted, though but a little man, the best at the exercise in England.
Okay.
So basically the Duke's gone to the footman, hey, fight the best fighter in England.
Do it.
Do it now. And then it gets written up. So that's the first ever thing. After this, 1698, you're getting the Royal Theatre of London is hosting regular bouts of this.
The theatre?
The actual theatre is, and it's the Royal Theatre. So that meant like it wasn't a vestige, that was actually the official Royal Theatre. Right? So this is all, it says at the time, and at the time, this is bare-fisted, no rules fighting, closer to UFC mixed martial arts.
Number of rounds, is there
unlimited rounds until someone can't go on.
Or it's a draw.
We'll get into all the detail, but it is like that full on. It was bloody brutal.
Yeah.
It's described by one, the people coming to watch it at this point, this is like 1698, as the audience is a vulgar and tumultuous rabble of vagrants, drunkards, ruffian brawlers, and gambling desperados. So like the Sports Bazaar audience.
Yes. Welcome aboard, everyone.
But the thing is, while this commentator sees it as this, the reality is the aristocrats are funding it. Lord Byron, the famous poet, is going.
He's involved.
Yeah, later in the century, but he's
He'd
going.
be under the drunkard category.
Very much. Well, he's in almost all of those. King George sets up a ring at Hyde Park in London in 1723. And so it becomes prize fighting where you fight for money. Yeah. It's the aristocrats. But women are definitely involved, especially around early 1700s, they're definitely fighting. Yes. And as the century goes on, getting up to 1800, they fight less. It becomes more frowned upon for women to fight. But in the early days...
I don't understand that. It feels unreal to me that would never happen.
It ebbs and flows throughout history of when women are allowed to do stuff. And at this point, it was still frowned upon by certain classes for women to fight, but it was more like things. So one match in 1722 involved two women taking the stage to box for a prize of 3 guineas. The rule for this match required each woman to strike each other in the face while holding a half-crown coin in each fist. And the first to drop a coin would be named the loser. So it's not even like just normal boxing, it's just punching each other. But, there's not real normal boxing at this point because there's no rules.
And this was popular?
Yeah, according to the London Journal, the two women maintained the battle with great valour for a long time to the no small satisfaction of the spectators.
Wow, that's a ringing endorsement.
Less common is there's actual as it goes on, there's 1795, there's still some of the last female boxing matches going on. There's one between Mary Ann Fielding and a boxer known only as the Jewess of Wentworth Street. There's a lot of calling boxers like the Jew, the Irishman, the Venetian. Like, there's a lot of just... And, it's just very blunt of what they are.
But I think that still exists today. I went to boxing in Madison Square Garden and I was just watching Golovkin fight. And what I was staggered by, every fight on the day, I've never seen them. The flags are for a nation.
Yes.
The flags are Cuban. The flags are Spanish. The flag are Mexican. People are going, we as a nation, it's not sports, it's not tribes. It's this. You are a national hero. You're a significant figure to our nation.
It's more like the FIFA World Cup with a team, but it's an individual. It's
Correct.
like you are representing the honour of our country,
and they
not
mean
just
it.
Yeah, absolutely. There's also some of these fights. It's like people are surprised how good the women are and how brutal they are in the local papers.
Yes,
but this is a paper, but by the end of this sort of the 18th century, so 1800 onwards, women fighting becomes more illegal and underground.
Right.
There's a letter to the Times. This is from September 1852.
Yes.
Right. And this is a letter someone writes in. This shows how women fighting becomes frowned upon. It says, Sir, G.W., this is another person who wrote in today's Times expressed his surprise that no man was found who would assist in the capture of the brute who knocked a woman down. So he's referring to something just happened in the street one day.
That's gone down.
He says, your correspondent will probably cease to wonder when he reads the following. About a month ago, I was at breakfast with my family at Kensal Green when I perceived a number of persons passing through the field adjoining my house. I endeavoured to ascertain the cause. With much difficulty, I did so. The stream of men and women had come from Paddington to a prize fight between two, no, not men, women, ! One of my family, being incredulous, contrived to look across the fields and there saw the combatants stripped to the waist and fighting, these two women. I love how he says, one of my family, being incredulous, worked out a way to watch. It's like, I think two people in the flat across are making love. I'll just go and see if I can see because I'm outraged. I'm going to watch the whole thing.
I'm going to take a closer look at this.
Yeah, I'm going to.
This could take a while.
I'll just
Don't expect me back.
Give me some privacy.
Yeah.
He said, and this is where he's blaming the men.
But were they naked? They were naked
from the waist down, right? Like
from waist up.
From the waist up, yes. Sorry, waist up. I've got to get that right.
Yeah.
From the waist up. So it's like a boxer today, but these happen to be women, right? But they're
foxy boxing.
Yeah, exactly. They're belting the living daylights out of them. He says, and this is where he's outraged at the men, because he's not blaming the women, he's blaming the men in this letter. He said, men took them there, men backed them, men were the bottle holders and timekeepers. They fought for about half an hour, some say for 5 shillings, some say for a sovereign, and some say they will do it again. I saw the winner led back in triumph by men. After the above, I think your correspondent will cease to wonder at the indifference of a Paddington mob. You, sir, have already drawn the moral from such things. Perhaps you will permit me to add my matured conviction that some vices and some crimes are too disgraceful for mere punishment of a clean, well-oiled, ordered and well-fed prison. Let us have the whipping post again, and at the flogging let the crime of unmanly brutes be written over their heads.
Jesus.
They could write a letter in the day.
That's an angry letter.
That's an angry letter. So that's a sort of... So you have over
written with a quill, probably.
Yeah, exactly. So in this time, you've got women's going from being able to box quite regularly to not.
It's going underground.
Yeah, but it's not as big as the men boxing, obviously. So, but they were very big on the watching of it all the way through, and they did fight fairly regularly, but it was often...
Okay.
So we come now to the first great boxer of all time, and where many people would say the modern day boxing sort of begins its path towards the rules we now know. And it's a guy called James Figg, and he's born in 1684. Others say
The
16.
Fruiterer. The Fruiterer. Is that his nickname?
He's born in 1684 or 1695. We don't know.
Yeah, records
right?
are-
So records then. He's born in near Oxford, and he's the youngest of 7 children. He grows up to be 6 foot tall, 185 pounds. So 6 foot tall in those days is big.
It's big.
So the average height back then in Britain was 5'5".
Staggering.
Now it's 5'9" across the US, Britain,
Incredible.
Australia, a lot of the Western countries. It's about 5'9".
Did they have weight divisions?
No weight divisions.
No, so
nothing.
this is just a...
Even more than that. It doesn't even resemble. And I'll go through. This is how different it is. So he's from a poor agricultural family, and his life's not easy. Apparently, we don't know much about it because there's record keeping before he gets to about sort of it becomes sort of famous through fighting. We don't know, but he gets a reputation early on for prize fighting. So this is when anyone can show up at a local fair and go, "I'll fight some champion," throw their hat in the ring and ring money, and he starts winning money. At the time, though, it's not just fists because you're coming out of the medieval times. So they are known. He becomes known for his mastery of the short sword, the cudgel, and the quarterstaff.
What, inside a boxing ring?
Yeah, so they would often have a round of fighting with swords,
Good Lord.
a round of fighting with a cudgel, which is a wooden club basically.
Sure.
They would have a round of fighting with bare fists, and which you could wrestle and do everything else, and they would have then a round potentially with the quarterstaff. Now, quarterstaff was a shaft of hardwood. It was 6 to 9 feet in length, and it would have a metal tip or spike attached to the end. So we're not talking like. So this is
do you
like
get to choose who goes
Some would
first? We'll have a.
They would
we'll do the bare
organise
knuckle
some of
first,
that.
or-
There would be like some who specialised in certain disciplines and stuff. But often it would be the big fights would be one round of this, and by rounds I mean the round could go half an hour.
Yeah.
One of quarter. It might start with swords, go to bare fists, then finish with cudgels was quite a common
I can
format.
imagine it going much past swords. If swords is your start,
But these guys
surely,
were so good they often wouldn't get nicked, so they could fight for half an hour and no one would actually get hurt, even though the other was trying to. Right? Because they were good, Figg referred to all these martial arts at the time. So this is what boxing emerges from, but at the moment it's not just boxing. As the manly art of self-defense. That's the name of it. Book he writes and all this sort of stuff, right?
Yeah.
It's no holds bars. It would take that you had to learn all these various weapon skills with swords, cudgels, everything. Also, you would have to learn for the fist fighting component of it.
Yes.
You would need to learn eye gouging, hair pulling, spit.
What? Talking about? Say it again.
You would need to learn, because these are all legal, you would need to learn, as well as fist fighting, eye gouging, hair pulling. All these guys, if you see...
These are the same things you had to learn to be one of the Three Stooges. You know that? This is incredible. Eye gouging, hair pulling.
All of them had shaved heads. When you see the drawings of them all,
for
so
tactical
so you
advantage.
couldn't pull their hair. Spitting. This just sounds like a night out. This is a night out with you.
I want to. This is
head-
not a Friday night.
Headbutting. What was referred to as pairing, which was both could refer to shin kicking sometimes or kicking someone while they're down.
I can see that.
Stomping and kicking down opponents and things, wrestling throws, grapplings, all of these were part of it. So it's more like UFC where you can punch on, but you can also wrestle someone.
To me, we're still a far way from boxing.
Yeah,
as
there's
we
no
know it.
rules, right? Basically,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So there was some organisation, but it was sort of like okay, now it's time to put the swords down and start the fist fighting, right? But it wasn't like it was like
Put the swords down. I'm going to kick you in the balls.
yeah, that's right. That was sort of it. And it wasn't until 1743, 13 years after Figg retires, that kicking an opponent while they were down and gouging their eyes was banned from the sport.
Woke nonsense.
And at the time, you asked about this earlier, people wrote letters going, this is going to destroy the manlyhood of England and let the French take us over. They wrote letters like that, going, this is the beginning of the end. This is the slippery slope to us, So they have to learn all these. So they're fighting for things like you would turn up at a fair when you were someone like him and open a stall and it would be, you'd travel around to fairs and you'd say, I will fight anyone.
Sure.
right? And people would come and say, all right, well, I'll fight you for, and they would fight for money, free beer, hats, it says, or cups. So it's like, I think it was like metal cups, that were worth something, but they would fight for all this.
Right.
And so you'd say, oh, I'll challenge you, I'm willing to challenge you. And so you'd fight. And he starts to gain this reputation as one of the greatest of these prize fighters.
Yes.
Like on any, whether it's fists, swords, whatever, he will
kind of fastest gun in the West kind of stuff. So if he turned up, would people go, "Oh, Figg's here"?
Yeah, you got a name and people wanted it. So you became more well known. And then so it's like the difference between going and seeing Mike Tyson fight in his prime compared to someone, some amateur boxer.
Yeah.
He started to get a bit of a known. He started to perfect this style of unarmed combat. This is where the boxing starts to emerge a little bit, where it became known as Figg's fighting. And it was more like the UFC where you could wrestle and box at the same time. And so he was very good he knew how to, basically, he was good at being able to fist fight, but he knew the wrestling perfectly.
Spitting? Was he a good spitter?
He was a great spitter, could hit you from a mile away.
It's a dead eye. He never missed.
He produced a lot of spit, Mick.
Eye gouging? He gouged a few eyes in his time?
You do anything, right? And so he would know whether to grapple, he could punch on, he could grapple, he could do everything. Yeah. He's earning a living doing this. He's travelling around. He would show up in England a few times and he would set up a stand at one of the great fairs there and say, it would have a sign up front, "Here I am, Jeremy Figg from Tame. I will fight any man in England."
Here's my card. I just love the formality of it was I'm going to beat your brains out.
By 1719, he was really now seen as emerging out of this sort of fighting martial arts thing, that he was declared by everyone as the best bare knuckle boxing champion. So they've started to single that bit out of the combat to go, he's the best at this. But he was actually seen as a better swordsman, and cudgels was his best.
You got to be good at cudgels.
But he knew all of it, right? So he starts to, at this point, get recognised by Peterborough's third count, Charles Mordaunt, who sees Figg fight and goes, "This guy is amazing," and goes, "I will fund your career. So I will pay for you to set up a fighting academy in London."
He's like a Don King.
Yeah.
He's like the original.
Yeah. So he sets Figg up they build a fighting academy to train noblemen and other fighters. Yes. So the working class fighters that he trains to go on and fight, the noblemen just learn it because it's seen as a good thing it's an art, and it's good to be a man. You need to be able to fight. If you can't fight, you're not a man.
You're still a fop.
But they're still fops. Yeah, they don't. It also is part of this fighting academy. He builds a thing and it becomes known as Figg's Amphitheatre, and it's like a boxing stadium where the public can come.
So instead of travelling around, now they're coming to him.
You're coming to him. And it's got a raised platform, wooden, supported by wooden railings, so not a boxing ring. Right. It's just a platform, more like a stage. You can have 1,000 people on the ground floor at any time watching, and in the gallery can be 200 or 300, which tends to be the nobility, but a huge amount of people for the day, like huge crowds. And as much as £3,000 begin to be wagered on every bout. So it becomes
it's getting organised.
Very organised den of all this sort of stuff. Still swords, cudgels, long staffs, spitting, biting, everything, right? Yeah. There was another one, his closest rival. More of these get copied. There was another one called Stokes Amphitheatre. It was slightly different. It was also run by Elizabeth Stokes, who was the wife of James Stokes, who owned it, and they ran it together. She would often fight on her own, or he and her as a husband and wife team would fight against other men and women.
Husband and wife team? Yeah. It's like the mixed doubles.
Yeah, let's really, let's go. And they would advertise that their female fighters would be in scanty dress. So they were really going and the Georgians loved this, right? They saw this they weren't like the Puritans of the Victorian era. They were like, yeah, great, this is great stuff. Go to Figg's for more of the pure combat. Go to this for more of the sexy fun
Figg's
stuff.
For cudgels.
The other one for lingerie.
For lingerie.
And we can almost do another podcast on Elizabeth Stokes because she ran this she was this tough woman who ran a boxing.
It's like a woman, madam running a brothel.
She was but she fought herself and everything. She was
fantastic,
very impressive. And I would go down the rabbit hole of that now, but we'll be here for weeks. So I want to do her in a future one.
Yep.
Figg's reputation grew to the point where all the gentlemen amateurs, so the people not prize fighting because they're already rich, and it's seen as bad if you're rich to fight for money, but you do it for... They all come and seek out Figg to tutor them. One was a Captain Godfrey, who he becomes Figg's biographer. And he says, I've purchased my knowledge with many a broken head and bruises in every part of me. And this is in his book, Treatise Upon the Useful Science of Defence. He says, as for Figgs himself, he says, he was of rugged temper and would spare no man, high or low, who took up a stick against him. It's all this pure violence with flowery language all around it.
The world they're living in.
So Figg becomes so good that people don't even challenge him anymore.
Sure.
He tends to fight semi-regular matches with reoccurring opponents almost for show and displays of how good he is with the sword and cudgel. Like they're almost like
an exhibition
exhibition martial arts displays, right, of how good you can be. He fights one guy called Roland Bennett 23 occasions over the course of his career. So it's like
Bennett,
that sort of...
He's a glutton for punishment.
He
thought he could take him. Did he ever win? No.
Well, he never won.
I would have thought after about a dozen.
Yeah.
You might go. Yeah.
I'll let you have one. It's like the Harlem Globetrotters and the Washington General, right? You know, like it's that sort of thing.
Right.
So they would fight each other all the time. It's believed Figgs fought a total of 270 fights. And you got to remember, these fights can go like 3 hours, some of them. He was only ever lost once. And the only person that ever beat him was a pipe maker by the name of Ned Sutton.
Ned, the pipe maker, Sutton.
Yeah, exactly. So Sutton
beat him. What's the Sutton story?
So Sutton's a native of Gravesend, which is sort of as you go down from London down the Thames to the sort of the mouth of it. And at the time, now it's part of London really, but at the time it was seen as a remote trading port and shipping station. So they looked down Londoners on Gravesend.
Yeah.
And the whole...
It's a port town. It's like a rugged...
on the river, on Thames, but Sutton's, his whole life has been just a pipe maker, right? But he likes as his recreation to fight.
With pipes? That'd be good, good for the cudgel.
I think he probably could fight with a pipe. No one would mind. Got it to the point where no one in Kent and that area where he came from would fight him.
Yeah.
So he couldn't get a fight, because everyone just knew who he was and went...
Well, that's sad.
Yeah. So, but he hears of this amazing...
A hard day of pipe making.
And you just want to punch on.
You want to beat someone's brains out.
Come on, guys.
Jeez.
So he literally can't fight anyone anymore. He's
cooked.
beaten everyone. And he's great with broadsword, quarterstaff, all fists. So he's good with all of them.
He's got to look further afield.
He does. He hears of Figg and he says, well, I need to challenge this guy, obviously, because I've done here. I need to go to London. It's 1723 and nobody's challenged Figg since 1719. Like he'd fought exhibition matches and various things, but no one's really challenged him to say, I'll be the champion. Yeah. Challenges are made in the paper. So the paper, it's organised, but people call each other out through the newspaper. Yeah. No, these are more organised because it's
so you do it publicly.
Yeah, I'll read you a couple that are in the actual newspaper. So William Willis challenges a guy called Thomas Smallwood. He says, and this is what it says in the paper. Whereas I, William Willis, commonly known by the name of the Fighting Quaker, have fought Mr. Smallwood about 12 months since and held him the Titus to it and bruised and battered him more than anyone he has ever encountered, though I had the ill fortune to be beat by an accidental fall.
That's sore losing.
Yeah, sore loser. I invite him to fight me for £100 at the time and place above mentioned, when I doubt not, but I shall prove the truth of what I have asserted by pegs, darts, hard blows, falls, and cross buttocks. Cross buttocks is a wrestling throw.
Wow.
They kept mentioning cross buttocks in my research, and I kept not knowing if
I was frightened to ask when you mentioned it. I just
and you'd be surprised how many hours into my research I went, I might just Google cross buttocks. I was scared to Google it too, but it turns out it's a wrestling throw.
This ad is the equivalent of playground. Meet me behind the shelter shed.
You know WWE wrestlers, how they would call do the interviews. It's like that, right? Then Thomas Smallwood responds in the paper. I, Thomas Smallwood, known for my intrepid manhood and bravery on and off the stage, accept the challenge of this puffing Quaker. And
This is early trash talk.
and will shew him that he is led by a false spirit that means him no other good than that he should be chastised for offering to take upon him the arm of the flesh. Right? So that's one. Here's another one. Whereas I, John Francis, commonly known by the name of the jumping soldier, who have always had the reputation of a good fellow and have fought several bruises in the street, nor am I ashamed to mount the stage with when my manhood is called in question by an Irish braggadocio. I now invite him to fight me for 2 guineas at the time and place above mentioned, where I doubt not I shall give him the truth of a good beating. And the Irishman, a guy by the name of Patrick Henley, replies, I, Patrick Henley, known to everyone for the truth of a good fellow, who never refused anyone on or off the stage, and fight as often for the diversion of gentlemen as for money, do accept the challenge of this jumping jack, and shall, if he don't take care, give him one of my bothering blows, which will convince him of his ignorance in the art of boxing.
This is incredible. Now, 2 guineas as opposed to the previous one was £100.
Yeah, so it could just
So the
depend.
challenger sets the price?
Roughly. And
Does he provide the...
It's who can get the money. So often some of the big boxers, they've got patrons who'll make the prize money more so they can make more fun having bets, and they will share in the prize money. Where the lesser boxers who are trying to build up, they might only, I can scrape together this much for the prize fight, you know. And so it can vary widely depending on how popular. Like today, you know, like the big fights are, you know, worth millions of dollars, and then there's fights happening on a Friday night at the local, gym that no one cares about, right? So
The problem with today's fights is, though, you don't see too many braggadocios. It's trash talk,
It's
and
trash
it's
talk.
talking yourself up. It's that,
And it's printed in the paper so everyone can read it all. I can't wait to...
How long would it take to respond generally? So someone makes a challenge.
Often it would be in the same paper, like they would organise it all.
So it's
almost
pre-planned.
We've got the
challenge
like
and the response.
And the response. So it's like a boxing media conference now, but it would be done in the paper, right, all at once, you know. But it would be written like full statements.
Well, this is just outstanding.
And you can go online and read all these, and I could have read.
I want to see all these fights.
Oh,
they have me hooked.
Yeah, straight up. There's a story behind it right away. So Figg, when he hears that his pipe maker, that he hears that Sutton wants to fight him, Ned Sutton, he says, well, this is great because he hadn't been challenged for ages, and business is getting a bit dull at his amphitheatre because King George has gone on his summer trip to Hanover.
Right.
And he's taken the aristocracy, all the cream of them all with him.
So it's a bit quiet.
It's a bit quiet at the amphitheatre. There's less people. And so this is affecting his ticket sales. So he loves this idea that Sutton, who he'd never heard of,
yes,
but you know, he's challenging him publicly. He's like, "This is fantastic. I can actually, go and fight him, and we'll talk." And he was becoming a good promoter as well, because as well as a fighter, he's a promoter. So he's great, and this leads to them fighting 3 times. The first is in 1723. Some of these we got a lot of detail on fights, some got a little because the record keeping at the time is not. So this is 1723. Remember,
who wins the first one?
The first one is where it begins with them starting with swords. This is the rules. We'll start with swords and fight till someone can't fight anymore to see who's superior in swords. Then after an interval, it's fists. And then if you're still up for it, for the third round will be cudgels. Right? And to win, you have to defeat the man in all 3 of these engagements.
All 3.
That's the idea, or make the person not be able to continue on at all.
Right.
So we don't know much about the first fight except Sutton wins when Figg suffers his first loss after he takes a wound in the belly from a sword and is also cloven in the foot. So he's had his stomach cut open and can't walk.
Still get out there, but the doctor still goes, he's good to go.
He's good to go. Walk it off.
Hey, imagine your corner man. So today, if you get a little cut above the eye, they'll get the Vaseline out, they get the press out, and they're doing it. Imagine a corner man, when you come in, what's happened? I've been stabbed with a sword. Can you fix this in 3 minutes?
Rub some dirt on it. It is literally like Because this is like not just boxing. This is boxing, but it's sword fighting and everything. So he's literally they're cutting each other with swords.
So he's cooked. He couldn't go on? Was he knocked out?
It's very early in the fight. There's not much detail this fight, but it's obviously very early on. Everyone's a bit disappointed. Like, one, that Figg's lost, but two, that it's not a classic match. It's just over relatively quickly. It's a bit of an anticlimax.
Yeah.
This leads to a rematch on the 6th of June, 1927. You'd be surprised, even though it's a few years later, it takes years to recover from some of these fights.
That's right.
So this one is like Fraser versus Ali. It is the rematch.
Everyone knows about this.
Everyone knows. Everyone is absolutely pumped. Everyone just cannot wait. And so they're like, let's go. So 1,000 spectators show up. The Prime Minister, Robert Walpole, is there. The Poet Laureate, Colley Cibber, who's very famous at the time, this is 1727, shows up. So, you got Alexander Pope, who's famous writer, and you got Jonathan Swift, who just published Gulliver's Travels. So all these people, so celebrities.
Do they ring announce them like today? And Jack Nicholson's there, and he gets up. Yeah,
it's exactly like
Jonathan
that.
Swift.
It's exactly like that, because today you have all the celebrities there, and this is where it's the working class, but then there's all the celebs there.
Can I say Figg would have been taken? Like, he probably got jumped. Figg, he probably. You know how some boxers today, they come in and they go, "Who's this chump?"
Yeah,
and they get sat on their ass, and then the next time they go, "Okay." I'm guessing Figg's coming back.
Figg's coming back going, I got to. I've never lost before.
We need to restore the natural order.
Yeah, we got to. So almost immediately, in this rematch, and this is in June 1727, Sutton drives Figg back and forces Figg to cut himself with his own blade. But that's ruled that's not. The wound's not considered serious enough to end it.
It's like an accidental headbutt or something.
Yeah. They keep fighting. Figg then cuts Sutton's shoulder with the sword. They then stop. It's the end of the sword round. It's sort of even. They break, and the fighters drink ale to build their spirits up again. It comes back with bare hand combat.
That Figg loves this.
Yeah, Sutton is the closest they reckon ever in ability to Figg on this, but they throw. Sutton knocks Figg, punches him, and it knocks him from the stage and into the crowd.
Well, that's usually game over.
Well, they pick Figg up, and he comes back in. Finally, Figg wears Sutton down and knocks him down, and then he gets him on the ground, and then he starts just pummeling him on the ground. And Sutton's bruised and bleeding, his mouth's cut, he's nearly blinded from swelling. And Figg says he had enough, and finally Sutton says, "Enough indeed. You are a brave fellow and my master."
Wow!
So Figg's run the rematch. Then they have a third one, and in the cudgel round, which is Figg's specialty, Figg breaks Sutton's knee
with the cudgel.
And literally basically can't go on, and so he's won 2-1 basically, and this is sort of the thing. So at this point, Figg decides, it's sort of by 1730, Figg's like, I think I've had enough of this.
Yeah. Way to check, please.
I'm going to go to this promotion and stuff. So he has 3 proteges, and we might get to these guys in the next episode, but one of them is a guy called Jack Broughton. He's one of the big guys. Another guy, Bob Whitaker. But what he does, Figg, as he's retired in 1930, it suddenly becomes a chance to promote these big fights. And he sets up what's seen as the first ever international bout of boxing in this stream of boxing. It's not a true world championship because the Americans aren't really a full country by this point. Are
they boxing?
They are, but they're the colonies at this point. They haven't even left. They haven't had the War of Independence yet. It's barely anyone there. It's just really England. It's just England, yeah. But in 1733, he sets up the first ever sort of international fight. In 1733, the Earl of Bath, William Pulteney, he imports a massive gondola, a guy from Venice. So this guy's a gondola in Venice, named Tito Alberto di Carini. He watches the giant beat up 3 men in a single night in Venice and says, why don't you come to England and fight in England? I think you could do well. So they call him the gondolier. Once again, very occupational based.
Yes.
He arrives in England and says, I'll break the jawbone of any opponent with the audacity to fight me. So
a little less flowery than I'm used to, but I'll allow it.
But you know what he's like? And apparently he's broken lots of jaws. This guy is a huge hulk of a man, huge muscles, massive. And everyone thinks, uh-oh. And they go to Figg and go, you got to defend England's honour. This guy's calling us all out. Figg goes, I'm retired, but I've got a guy, I'll set up the fight, and I've got a guy, one of my students, Bob Whitaker, who goes on to be a great fighter. I'll get him to fight him. I'll prepare him. He'll fight him. So in Figg's amphitheatre, this fight takes place, and a large crowd gather there, all the nobility, heaps of cash. Everyone is betting on this.
Sure.
King George II watches the fight from a specially constructed royal box in the amphitheatre.
Great.
The Venetian comes out. There's some Venetians in the crowd. They all start cheering.
Here we go.
And it's very, like you say, very
tense.
international and tense, and there's money everywhere. He's beaming with confidence, and he takes off. He strips off his top, and he is a giant of a man, huge, one of the biggest men all of them have ever
Intimidating
seen.
presence.
Huge, and they all go, uh-oh.
Here's trouble.
And they've all got money riding on England. And they're like, uh-oh.
How can I get on the gondolier?
Yeah. So then Whitaker comes out. Whitaker takes off his robe or equivalent, and not so impressive. And they're all like, oh, no.
We're cooked.
We're cooked. The gondolier opens with the fight starts, and the gondolier straight away, a huge blow to the side of Whitaker's head, which knocks him off the stage.
Okay.
Not a good start.
Get back in there.
The Venetian supporters are they're cheering, and they're going, oh, this is great. Whitaker, though, gets up straight away, gets back in and starts attacking. And he runs in and just gives this almighty body shot to the Venetian. And the Venetian ends up on his knees, vomiting.
Well, again, is this a standing count? Or, there's no count, is there? This,
and then,
just checking.
And then Whitaker just pummels him until basically
all over.
It's all over, and the gondoliers concede. But this is seen as the first world championship sort of fight.
International planned.
Figg thinks, great, I'm going to set up a bunch more fights like this. But in 1734, he actually passes away, and he leaves behind wife and several children. And this is the end of this first era of boxing.
Yeah.
And where we might return next time is really where we get the first set from Jack Burrow, his student, the first set of Jack Broughton, his student, coming up to sort of 1730s, the first ever rules put in place for boxing that lead directly to the rules
That's
we
the
now
end of
have.
it.
Where the nanny
Rules.
state come in. So that's I think we will leave it for today.
Thank you. I've enjoyed that. I'm going to go and spit on someone and go their knee with a cudgel. Because you can. Thank you, Titus O'Reilly. We'll be back to finish this story, to boot home the history of boxing. Wow.
If you want to get in touch with us, there's so many ways. Go to our website, sportsbazaar.com. You can contact us there. All the social medias, as the kids refer to it, we're on all of them. Get on there. You can follow us and get kept up to date with what we're doing. And if you can, go on to Apple Podcasts and follow us there, but leave a rating. That has a huge impact on us in the charts and other people finding us. And if you can tell other people about it, that would be great, because we want to share this nonsense with as many people as humanly possible. So thanks once again for listening, and we will see you next week.
Cheers.